Thank you for joining us for this week's Construction Cast. We've got a great set of speakers this week, three brilliant people. We're going to have a chat about recruitment and retention, how to find people, how to keep people, skills shortages, all of those sorts of things. So I'm going to start by introducing the speakers. So we've got Christine Gausden, who's not only a very experienced construction manager and a submariner, I think, from her LinkedIn profile. I've never talked to Christine about her submariner experience, but it sounds fascinating. So she's also an academic and an educationalist with a particular interest in bringing good people into construction, working with role models in the industry to inspire people and take up careers in the industry. So very grateful to Christine for joining us this morning. We've got James Mowat. Sorry if I pronounced. I've never actually asked you how to pronounce your surname. Sorry.
You've got it better than most. Spot on.
James is one of the generous sponsors of our masterclass, which is coming up in Riyadh in a few weeks' time. He's director of the recruitment business Energi People. Starting from life as a homeless teenager, he turned things around and now runs a charity as well as working and running Energi People. He specialises in recruiting great people into the right roles within the industry. So grateful again to James for joining us this morning. And then John Shenton, who is based in the Middle East. I described him in my notes as something of a demagogue. He seems to have done pretty much everything in his career. As well as being another experienced construction manager, John's a cultivated negotiator with a track record in constructing and closing deals. He also has a detailed understanding of FIDIC contracts. I met him on a legal training course that we were on in Paris a few years ago. He's got strong experience, obviously, of working in the Middle East and recruiting people across the Middle East and Africa. He's also chair of the Chartered Institute of Building in the Middle East, and he's also going to be joining our masterclass in Riyadh in March. So thank you all for joining us today. We are looking forward to having a little chat today about construction skills, construction recruitment, and all of that sort of stuff. Just before we start, I thought I'd give this a little plug. So I went to a talk with Fred Mills. He's got more followers than us on YouTube, but the B1M, he's doing this campaign at the moment about Get Construction Talking. It's a mental health thing. It's really interesting. So if you have a chance, have a look at the B1M's campaign around Get Construction Talking. I don't get paid for that. I just thought it was a really nice and interesting campaign to have a look at. So anyway, we'll move on. First question, and I'll put this to John because he's got an eye on the international market. He's based out in the Middle East. We might ask James as well because he's also doing a lot of work out in that region. But one thing that we talk about in the UK, I find, is that it always seems to be, we've got a terrible skills shortage and we're struggling for staff in the UK. But John, do you think the skills shortage is the same worldwide? Are there same issues in the Middle East, in Africa, as there are in the UK? What's your feeling?
Well, my take on it is there is a skill shortage, and that is worldwide, but there are different factors that have caused that skill shortage. So alongside my professional role where I chair the CIOB within Dubai, I also by day work for a recycling contractor, Averda. We oversee a portfolio within the GCC, South Africa and India. Now, there are skill shortages in all of those markets, but they've arisen for different reasons. So obviously there's a commitment to build affordable housing in the UK, and there's the need to attract new graduates into the industry. Within the GCC, there is more of a youth unemployment issue, and there's been a disconnect in connecting recent graduates, training programs, and the forms of qualification they might need to take their first steps within the construction sector. If I look across to the recent efforts that have been made across the GCC with the sort of different programs to increase the participation of nationals, say with Saudiization, Emiratization, or Omanization, that's gone some way to trying to correct that disconnect, but it doesn't get away from the fact that a significant proportion of the resource that's used in the development of built assets in this part of the world tends to be expatriate resource, and that brings different pressures. So there'll be different factors that influence where people work. If I look at the portfolio that we oversee in South Africa, for historical reasons, there are been issues with deurbanizing a significant proportion of that population, preventing their participation in higher education, in upskilling them, and there are different programs in place to correct that. What that principally means for myself, if I'm trying to place recent graduates or young people with work experience programs or internships, there are different complexities that I have to surmount depending on the different markets that I'm involved in. I'd love to talk about India, but it's a very, very, very large country, and we're actually only involved in one state at the moment. But all of those concerns, the disconnect between skills that you've got and what's actually needed in the marketplace are evident there as well.
Thank you. I put myself on mute and couldn't get myself off quickly enough. I might just leave it off now. James, have you got anything to pick up on any of that at all?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of my presence nowadays, or historically actually, for nearly 20 years, has been the MENA region as well. But naturally, that has expanded out from that as the years have gone by. And I completely agree with everything John has said, and we see exactly the same. I've even compared the talent pool to more of a puddle recently with clients. It definitely isn't a pool anymore. In certain niches, especially within construction, MEP being one of the ones that I personally have always focused and specialised in. But that genuinely spans the world. We've had a client in the US that approached us about 3 or 4 months ago, and they had a role within the data centre sector that had been live for around about a year. Would you believe it? We luckily have just filled that, which is great. But that was with a global engineering consultancy as well, a brand that you wouldn't think would really need assistance of a recruitment business in the UK, let alone someone in the US. So the fact that they reached out to us goes to say quite a lot, even over there. But also Singapore, we've had exactly the same as well. A role that was live for around about 8 months. Hong Kong, one of the big things over there has actually been the B&O agreement, British National Overseas, for those that aren't familiar with it. It essentially means somebody, a Hong Kong resident, can come to the UK and work in the UK for a period of up to 5 years without the need for employment sponsorship. So that's been amazing in terms of sort of fixing the talent pool shortages we have here. However, that's now created a massive talent shortage over there because the exodus of people that have left. So yeah, that has been again another role that's been live for pretty much a year that we've now actually been approached to work on a retained basis for that as well. And in the UK, it's exactly the same. The challenges from especially a design perspective, whether it be structural engineering, civil engineering, MEP, we see exactly the same things in terms of talent shortages. So yeah, across the world, same sort of sectors, it's exactly the same wherever we seem to go.
Interesting, really interesting. And so, Christine, what do you think as an educator and also as a professional in the industry, what do you think needs to be done? How can we come? Is the solution education and training, or is it wider than that?
I think rather obviously education and training is inherent to enhancing that skills, or not enhancing the gap, but enhancing the skills that we need. I take two perspectives. I take a perspective as of now and a perspective for the future, and inherent to that perspective for the future. And to my mind, it doesn't matter what level of skills we are seeking to address, whether we're looking at professionals, whether we're looking at the labour force, whether we're looking at inherent manufacturing skills. We need to review the image from the widest perspective of our industry, that image of the built environment. We were talking between us earlier relative to the lack of clarity, particular to new legislation that's incoming. We then went on to talk about potential new assets, some incredible assets that we build in the UK and across the world, and we do not celebrate success. So part of bringing those skills within to the built environment is to talk about our world from a very positive perspective. And that's part of a much broader issue. From my literal academic perspective, rather obviously in the first instance, and that what I've just said is inherent to my need. I need people in seats. I need people to step forward to wish to be educated. And what I have to impart, and this is my current remit, not my personal remit, but the remit from the QAA, is as an academic, I have to impart knowledge, skills, and behaviours. And my take is knowledge and skills are actually relatively easy to impart, behaviours less so. And what I very much do, and I have progressively done as I've increased my academic experience, is more and more I teach from a holistic perspective. So I encourage my students, who are all working professionals, concurrent their studies, but I encourage they to think about every action they undertake, they have an impact on other people. And therefore, my second take is to better use those resources we currently have in place, not to use that silo mentality, but to take that wider approach. If we perhaps better use the current skills that we have available, we then build a much better platform for the future. And maybe that has an impact on our image forthgoing.
Thank you. Sorry. Try to make notes as we go along. So that's really, really interesting. I think, John or James, do you have any views on that perspective as well? Have you got any thoughts on what Christine's just said?
I think if I just quickly pick that one up, I concur with everything that Christine said. We've been pretty fortunate in Dubai in December of this year. Between November and December, we were hosting COP28, which is where the international community descended here to try and agree on the measures required to limit the increase in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees of their baseline. I led Tomorrow's Leaders, a site inspection of that, taking young professionals and students around COP28, and we participated in a few different events. And that was for me, that was quite interesting, because I was dealing with people between the ages of 17 and 21. With my professional hat on, representing the largest professional body in construction management, but having a chat with them about what we need from built assets down the line to try and meet this climate crisis that we're trying to mitigate at the moment. Not sure, James, if you've got anything to add from.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the thing I always think back as well, just talking about education from a construction standpoint, my view of construction, all I used to think about before I got into this job was a bricklayer. That's all I knew about construction. I had no understanding, I had no appreciation of the amount of skills that are required to build a building, let alone maintain it and make sure it stands up and that it's everything inside it works. So that the message, the education of the amount of roles, the skill sets that are required in the industry, I'm sure that's a big part of what you do, Christine, isn't it? Educating within education of what our industry actually is, and the vast amount of skill sets that are actually in it. And a big thing for me, I had the exact conversation yesterday with a client, was thinking about what, this sounds like a quote on a wall, I apologize, but what you actually need versus what you think that you want. What is it? What skills do you actually need to fill this role? I'm not the wish list of this impossible person that doesn't exist. What are the key critical skills that you actually require? And honing down into that. I think that plays a massive part in what we can all do as well, in educating our peers as well as within education.
I think there's also, jumping across you, Stuart, there, I think there's also an over focus on demographic. That, again, that strap line, X% of our industry will be retiring in the next decade. Well, that's the world. That's always going to happen. And we've been saying that throughout my career. And referencing what you've just said, James, I think we over highlight the numbers and we don't focus on the real resource and the skills. And as you've just referenced, the skills that our industry actually needs. As one of those parties who does fall into that demographic, yes, I won't be actively working, I perceive, in a decade's time, but the skills I currently possess, not to say they're not applicable right now, but is my current skill set what will be needed in a decade? Quite likely not. And we need to turn that conversation round, I perceive. And again, just going back to that broader topic that, again, James, you just alluded to, throughout the entirety of my career, be it as a practitioner or as an academic, and likewise all of you in the room today as part of this team, I know we've all been out there talking to schools, talking to careers advisors. What is it going to take to turn that image round? Again, that appreciation of the vast array of careers and the most brilliant careers that you can embark upon as part of this wider built environment. I'd like to see, and I haven't got that budget, but I would like to see a massive PR exercise from our industry.
Yeah, that's a really
challenging. How we answer that, we have to answer that collectively, obviously.
And I think, without wanting to sound too much, this has not happened deliberately, but again, I would say that the one thing that Fred at the B1M has done very well is to portray the industry in a very positive light and show all those things that are going really well. And as my background, as people will probably know, is in working in things where things have not gone so well. So I see all the things that have gone wrong, and we think the industry is terrible. But actually, there's a huge amount of stuff out there that's going really, really well, and we're doing wonderful, amazing things and innovation and all of that sort of stuff, which is brilliant.
Can I just give you an absolute classic, Stuart, that quite frequently when I go out to speak in schools, I'll have a colleague sitting next to me out there ready to talk about the built environment. And what have they got? A hard hat and a high vis. Why not a presentation about our fabulous assets, the buildings that we produce, the buildings that we deliver? No, you can't take that building into the classroom, but you can talk in a really, really positive way. What image, and I'm not saying it's the wrong image from a safety perspective, but what image does that hard hat bring to the classroom?
Exactly. One of the things as a marketing consultant we constantly battle with, particularly when we work with things like law firms and stuff like that, is their brochures and their marketing, and it always includes a hard hat and a drawing, and it's just that, and somebody in there's stock images of people in very shiny hard hats that have never ever been anywhere near a site as well. But it's just the concept that that's the only thing that you can associate with construction. It's all of this stuff. And we always try and say, well, actually, let's use some different imagery. People in a meeting, people discussing, resolving issues, things like that. So anyway, let's move on. The next question on my list is how do we keep people? How do we find and retain people? And also, an interesting question that arose the other day is the answer just to pay people more? And I thought we'd bring up this little survey that James put out on LinkedIn a few weeks ago. My screen is a complete mess. I've got so many windows open, but hopefully you can all see that survey that James put up on LinkedIn a few weeks ago. What makes you choose a new employer over another? And obviously, we'd all think of the natural response, and particularly when some of I think James was saying, some of his candidates, people that he's placing in roles, oh, well, I want more money. But actually, when people think about it and they're asked to fill in a survey, that's what people are thinking about more. So it's the benefits package. Well, firstly, obviously, the 35% employee well-being, benefits package, projects, or just pay me more. And just pay me more is 17%. I did a similar one a few weeks ago where I was much more brutal. I just said, is it pay or something else? And the majority went with something else. So it's that kind of, is money the answer? Arguably not. I certainly think, I was having this discussion the other day with various strikes that are happening in the UK at the moment. Is the answer to pay these people more, or would they be much happier if their schools ran properly, their hospitals were better equipped and ran properly and they had more spare time? Would they be happier if they were, I was reading it. I'm sorry if I shouldn't be dominating the conversation, but I will. The rail strikes. I read a post on Facebook the other day from a train driver who said things were great in the 80s. Then we got paid loads of money, but the conditions went down. I was like, well, getting paid loads of money, not necessarily the answer, but is pay the answer? What is the answer? Let's start with James, because that's his thing on the screen. So I'll just stop sharing that. What do you think, James?
The evidence is there, and it's really interesting, because when we talk about the wider talent shortage here as well in the UK, to circle back to that. Historically, I had some pretty senior people that would come back to the UK from the likes of Dubai, And there would be a stereotype that those people were just after money, which is why they went overseas. And companies were actually really reserved when it comes to employing them here, because they just thought that they would leave again in 6 months or a year when the next paycheck comes. My network on LinkedIn is from people from all over the world, and went through the contributors there, and it's from people across the whole of the construction industry, different roles, different nationalities, and the results speak for themselves. So if companies aren't focusing on looking after their people, especially in our industry where, as we're talking about, there's such a talent shortage there, which means there's a huge lack of resource. So if there's a lack of resource, naturally that means that more people have to muck in and work longer hours, which means there's more stress, there's more strain, which leads to there needs to be more focus on employees' well-being. Absolutely. But I was very, very, very surprised. I actually thought that it would be either money or benefits package from the conversations that we generally have with a lot of candidates.
Could I just chime in here and say I was less surprised actually when I saw that data. Now I'm actively involved in the Saudi Giga Projects program at the moment, whether it's phase 0 or phase 1 of the Red Sea development or Neom Oxagon. And you're obviously familiar with the marketing material and renders. These look like they're going to be fantastic assets when they're finished. Admittedly, Red Sea phase 0 a little bit closer to where it's meant to be. But if you're placing construction manager out on site or a remote location, and he's got a young family with him, there's only so long you can do that for if the schools aren't up to scratch, if the healthcare doesn't meet their standards. And when their children are translating from primary school to secondary school, there are a whole plethora of issues that suddenly rear their head. And okay, you take home pay at the end of the day might say this amount, but you're sacrificing something that's maybe a little slightly more intangible. So I'm going to say, actually, in terms of actually trying to place resource within the last 2 to 3 years, I was less surprised by that survey result.
It's interesting. I'm glad you've said that, John, because that I think there is that perception that, particularly in Saudi, if you want people to work in Saudi, you've got to pay them a ton of money. But actually, there's more to it than that. It's not that simple. Christine, have you got any thoughts?
I agree with the previous speakers. I don't think it's all about remuneration, and I would widen that perspective of well-being. It's not only about your daily conditions, it's about your future as well, putting you in an environment as a professional or a pending professional where you have the potential to enhance your prospects, to enhance your career prospects, to rise to a senior position reasonably rapidly. And construction, our built environment, offers all those opportunities. Something I checked out last night when I was thinking about our discussion today, I looked at the ONS statistics, and whilst again this is a pretty broad statistic, 1.4 million people are employed in construction related work in Great Britain. Now that's a broad statistic and obviously encompasses a whole range of people. And going back to the need to motivate others, to encourage others, to young persons to work within the built environment, to pursue a career within, if there are 1.4 million of us within the UK alone, and accepting we've got John and James who work, and yourself who work internationally, perhaps if we all mentored one person and invited one person, encouraged they to join our industry, that's a plethora of skills we might introduce. If we did so in reality, perhaps my world of academia and education would be overwhelmed in the first instance. But I think I mentioned the need to work collectively previously, but we all have an individual responsibility as well.
That's fantastic. We're coming to the end of we only get half an hour. We restrict ourselves to half an hour. It's a self-imposed rule. And there's some interesting questions coming through, and I've got another question to add. So if you do have any questions, people watching, if you want to drop them into the Q&A rather than the chat box, that's very helpful. So there's a first one from Mamad Yusubov, who says, we say construction, but that covers a wide spectrum of industries. And another obstacle he finds perhaps that created by hiring managers is industry bias. I think this is a good point as well, because as somebody with a music degree who spent 24 years working in construction, most skills are quite transferable, and yet that mobility is not always open for talent. Is there any, his question is there any positive change in this direction, or do we perhaps think there should be positive change into accepting people from other backgrounds or with other skills into the industry?
For me, it absolutely has to be. This covers a little bit about what Christine was saying earlier with transferable skills. What can we train? That's got to be the question, isn't it? What skill sets have people got, but what can we train? What can we use that they've done previously, or even haven't? If it's going to be a fresh graduate or not even a grad, somebody that's come out of school, what can we actually train versus what do we think we need?
Yeah, I'll give you a take on that as well, Stuart. I teach at master's level. Almost all of my students are non-cognate. They've got a degree in something completely different. They've either been recognised by an employer, or they have recognised themselves that potentially our built environment is more applicable to, or they can better apply their skills across the wider built environment. There are a number of initiatives out there within the UK at the moment, referencing my military world, the use of ex-military personnel, which I know has huge depth in terms of progression. And some of these initiatives have been out there for some time. I think we are, to respond to the question directly, I think we are embracing those wider skill sets and recognising that they can be applied within our world.
I would just chime in there and say, look, we're in the process of transferring what's traditionally been viewed as an industry into a profession. Obviously, got my CIOB hat on here, trying to develop a community of chartered professionals. Having some form of professional accreditation behind you would go some way to correcting some of the shortcomings identified by the question.
Brilliant. So I'm just reading through the question. I think this one's quite interesting. So, I mean, as this person's as a legal professional in the construction industry, but what are the skills recruiters are looking for? I guess
I assume that's for me.
Yeah. I mean, are you looking? I guess you've got to focus on M&E, but what sort of skills do you look for in a good candidate? I guess
in a good candidate, it's to be complete. I'm not trying to dodge the question here, but it completely depends on the type of position it is. We have quite a few clients that specialize within the data center sector, so the client's natural first question they're going to ask, or sorry, the first thing on the job description is going to be data center experience. I know that's not legal, sorry, but it's generally recent experience on projects. That's for the Middle East. I can safely say project sectors is going to be one. In terms of transferable skills, I would certainly suggest, if it's depending on the role we're looking at placing that person into, problem solving skills can be a huge thing, especially in the Middle East. People that can are solution focused, problem solving skills can be very helpful over there or anywhere in our industry.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, I mean, if that question, not quite sure from the way it's worded, but if that question, the person asking the question is particularly wanting to know what legal recruiters would be looking for, I think one of the things, I was just chatting to somebody last night who started off as did a law degree at university, then went into quantity surveying, then came out of QSing and went back into the law. And the one thing that law firms are particularly crying out for at the moment is good construction lawyers. If you've got experience of actually working in construction as well, then that's a massive bonus for the law firm. So that's particularly one thing. There's a few other questions, all sorts of things. Oh, this is an interesting one. Oh, there's loads of interesting stuff. Thank you very much. So how do we stand out against thousands of people who apply in addition to a list of unrealistic requirements? I guess that's, again, James, if you want to start with that, and then perhaps certainly John might have a view on it as well. But how do you stand out against thousands of people who apply in addition to a list of unrealistic requirements? I guess that's probably employers' requirements. What do you think, James?
Yeah, and they're absolutely spot on with the thousands of people, because genuinely for a job ad, if I put something up out in Dubai or Riyadh, I generally tend to get between 1 to 2,000 applications per vacancy. And the honest truth is 999 of them are not relevant to the actual job that we're advertising for. We get electrical people applying for mechanical. But the biggest thing for me is making yourself stand out is by getting your voice heard. So if somebody calls me directly, my number is pretty easily accessible from my LinkedIn. That's the way to get my attention, and stand out from the pile of CVs, because internationally it definitely is.
Yeah. What do you think,
if I'm
John?
going to go a little bit more, if I'm going to be a little bit more esoteric, the historian Niall Ferguson obviously published a tome a few years ago which explored the idea of network theory, and how we develop networks. We've got these fascinating tools, LinkedIn being one of the prime ones. If you travel over into Western Europe, where there tends to be a bit more suspicion on LinkedIn, if you're on Zing or something like that, as soon as I meet somebody, I'm either scanning their business card, so I have the ability to look them up on LinkedIn later, or I've got my smartphone out trying to identify what papers they've published, what articles they've been involved in, what projects they've been involved with. And that for me is just about developing my network. I don't really know where that person's going to fit in, but the fact that we're talking within one setting suggests to me that at some point I may be able to help them. They may as well be able to help me.
I know we're about to finish, Stuart, but I'm absolutely going to echo what John has just said. I'm badged up with CIOB logo material here, and it's how three of us came together in very different guises over the past decades. Networking is hugely important, and not just from James's perspective as a recruiter, not just to plug that skills gap, but to us, again, that collective progression as an industry.
I think that's really important, and yeah, I think John, is an example of somebody who's made his voice heard. There can be few better examples of that from you, because as Christine rightly said, we've been brought together through the CIOB, but also John and I came together through the SEL, and John is a relentless networker, and that's how he's got to where he is, or certainly one of the reasons where he's got to where he is today, because of having a good, strong network and making your voice heard, and not saying no as well. As I always go to universities and do talks, and volunteering for stuff is important. Put your hand up and say, yeah, I'll have a go at that. Is really important as well. One final question before we go, and it's a really good one, I think, is what is the industry doing to tackle inequalities? Any thoughts from anyone? Christine, let's start with you.
I could go around that hamster wheel. I've been involved in issues particular to EDI for several decades. In some respects, I think let's continue with business as usual and embrace all. And that's my bottom line at the end of the day. Sometimes, and this alludes to what I referenced, particular to the skills gap, that current and pending skills gap. We overly focus on the negatives. Let's progress and make EDI business as usual. That's my perspective.
Yeah, brilliant. John, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll chime with everything that Christine said. I think we've kind of skirted around the issue. We've talked about demographics, we've talked about statistics. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. The biggest demographic is the people with a disability. I think the construction industry has done an incredible amount in the 10 or 15 years that I've been very, very actively involved with it to try and correct that. Whether that's through use of increased digitization, and also other methods to improve access to sites and that side of things.
Yeah, and I think that question is a webinar in its own, isn't it? There's so much of this could be a whole talk on its own. But yeah, James, any closing thoughts on any of this, or that question? Or
completely agree, and I actually I hosted a number of webinars last year for women in MEP and created a community specifically, and a lot were or are based in the Middle East, and there's been huge strides, especially in the UAE and Saudi, when it comes to women in leadership positions or any particular roles. And one that really stood out to me was actually a Saudi lady. I was a judge at the MEP Awards last September in Dubai, and Saudi lady was one of the nominees. And the challenges that she'd faced as a graduate, to get to where she is, even just 2 years in the industry, was shocking, but amazing that those doors are starting to actually open, and the stereotypes of somewhere like Saudi aren't actually what is really going on. People are actually really making an effort.
I think there is a lot to be said for, you know, the kind of perceptions of the industry, perceptions of different countries and regions are, you know, people have things that they've read in the press or certain things that they've been told at school that are not necessarily the reality. And I think, yeah, if we can get that message out however we can and keep getting the message out through all the networks that we can, then perhaps things will improve. And they are improving. Things are improving phenomenally. I was amazed, you know, going back to the Saudi point, how different that was. I went there 10 years ago. I went there 3 months ago. Unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable difference in every sense of the word. So anyway, thank you all very much indeed. I hope that's been useful to everybody who's been tuned in and listening. There will be another construction cast coming up in a few weeks' time. Annie's just sorting out the date with the speakers. That's going to be on a completely different topic. We're going to be looking at international arbitration in a few weeks' time. So for fans of international arbitration, tune in then. We'll send you out the emails and all the details of that as they come. Thank you to our speakers, to James, to Christine, and to John. And thank you everyone for joining this morning, and hopefully see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.